All right, looks like we're live.
Excellent. Welcome everyone to our webinar on the science of screens.
On the eve of Halloween, I just asked Claude AI for a joke about a Halloween joke about screens, and it said, "What kind of screen do ghosts use?" Get it? A beautiful display.
Can we start again?
Yeah. Oops.
Well, welcome everyone. So this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are, you're joining myself, Jonny Kirk, the VP of Product at ScreenCloud, Mark McDermott, our CEO, but also Chuck Gose, who's head of community at Firstup. Chuck is going to be joining us a little later. Something interfered, but he will be joining us in a little while. So we're going to be talking about the science of screens. But before we get into that, I want to ask Mark, if I asked him the first thing that comes to his mind when I say science, what is it?
Well, I'm immediately transported back into the 90s when I was at school, and I'm thinking of the periodic table, trying to memorize all of those, and Bunsen burners and test tubes, and sort of slightly failing my exams. That's my science Halloween nightmare.
Yeah, well, that's similar for me. When you say science to me, or specifically when you say Bunsen burner, I remember someone dropping a tripod onto my finger and burning it, and that memory has been burnt onto my mind. But actually, I'm quite fond of science. I have enjoyed science as a spectator rather than someone who's been thoroughly involved. But today we're going to piggyback on two really interesting white papers. We're not going to be going through the white papers in detail. One of them is the neuroscience of visual media, and the other is a white paper on the behavioral science of digital signage, and we'll share all the details of those later. We're not going to do a deep dive in the science. We're going to draw out the practical topics and tips that have come out of those two white papers.
Exactly, exciting.
So, super. Well, look, we'll jump right in, and we're going to start talking about the neuroscience of visual media and the reality that our brains actually do love screens. We respond really positively to screens, and we're going to talk for a few minutes about why that is. But I guess you only need to look around you.
Screens are everywhere, aren't they? Like, I think this is what's one of the interesting things for me is that we instinctively know. I haven't been into a building that hasn't got screens on a wall. Like in my whole professional career, I've never been in a building where there aren't screens all around. So we instinctively feel the need to put them up, but really, most of us, especially in the communications professionals, have never really used it as a channel. I think that probably the more sophisticated use of it historically has been for like advertising networks and very commercial use cases. But screens as a communication channel is not as mature as it is for email or for messaging and things like that. And we sort of, I think, because we use those mediums more in our day-to-day lives, we kind of understand the etiquette and the rules of that. But when it comes to screens, and what we see mostly with our customers is people are trying, and it's great, but often it's kind of falling short. And I think if we just use this, period of time, this short period of time we've got today, just to go into some of the core principles and basics of like how the eye and the mind work and how we respond to this stuff, then it will help people be a bit more deliberate in how we use screens. And, so that's kind of, it's just really grounding it in something a little bit more strategic. And I think it starts with the brain and the eye, really.
Yeah. I think while communicators have focused on intranets and email and apps, advertisers haven't. Like, advertisers have been taking screens seriously for like decades now. And there has actually been a real understanding of the impact of screens as communication tools, but just not for employees or communities. So they've kind of got the jump in that respect on us. Okay, so the first topic that comes up in the white paper on the neuroscience of visual media is attention and the impact that screens have in actually just grabbing our attention. And it's well documented in the last couple of years that there is a battle for attention going on. That not just employers and customers, but everyone is after our attention one way or another.
I suppose the one thing you have here is that even a modestly sized screen, but most of the screens are pretty big these days, like a kind of 50 or 60-inch screen up on a wall, emitting all of this light in the environment. It's actually the one of the few digital mediums that in a physical environment can actually capture your attention, whereas everything else is more of a distraction from your phone or your device. And in some of these environments, you're not allowed, if you're deskless workers like we've got here in manufacturing, they're not actually allowed to have personal devices out there. So it's a really kind of actually there's a comment there about having a copy. We will be sharing all of this afterwards, so all of this stuff, don't feel the need to make notes or anything. We'll share it afterwards, but the eye just is drawn towards light. I mean, if you ever look at like a small child or a baby or a toddler, if there's like a really bright light, they just instantly kind of go towards it. And so the reality is we're just going to be seeing these screens the moment we walk in, even if we're not necessarily going up very deliberately like they are in this picture and actually reading it. You're going to pick up that information irregardless once you basically walk into that room and scope it out.
Yeah, there's the white papers call out a principle they refer to as the illusion of depth, which basically means that if you have a screen, as you can see my phone here, taking up this amount of real estate, visual real estate, and a large screen far away taking up the same amount of my visual real estate, the large screen, even though it's farther away, will attract my attention. And actually, at first, when I first read that, I was a little dubious because we're so obsessed with our small screens. But I experienced this, and it always surprises me a little bit. I experience this on a weekly basis just in our own office.
Yeah.
We work with screens, and in our Belfast hub, we've got a bank of screens behind me that I don't really see. But with screens on the side of the office that we use for communication, we use to keep all our teams up to date, and we use them to let them know what's going on. And I regularly find myself drawn to a headline or something on the screen and getting up and maybe scanning the QR code or even talking to someone about it. And it's quite often after that, I realize I've already seen that earlier on in the day in a Slack feed, but it hadn't registered. It had not drawn my attention to it.
Well, that's the thing. As a knowledge worker, it's actually using the screen to cut through the noise, where it might be something you'd already seen, but in amongst the noise, you just pass by. Whereas drawing attention to it on a screen and making it bigger is kind of a social signal to say, hey, we think this is more important. If you think of Hollywood, right, the name up in lights, who has top billing? It's the main lead actor. The size of the font is telling you that, hey, this is important, draw attention here. And then unfortunately, the supporting actors get like smaller and smaller mention. But putting something up big is a social signal to everyone to say, hey, we think this is important. We've done a bit of editorial here, and we'd like you to read this. Like, that's kind of what that sort of size attention hierarchy means. And again, putting something up in lights, which is basically putting it up on a screen. I feel it myself where when I see anything, in our own screens, if I see a picture of me with a quote or whatever, I'm like, oh, look, even though I probably was said that in a meeting or on another medium, when I see my own name up in lights, I once actually, one of our customers, Old Dominion, they did a screen takeover in their lobby when I went to visit them, and it just said, welcome, Mark McDermott. And I got a real buzz just from seeing my own name up on those big screens. Like, I felt very welcomed, and it impacted me.
I actually can think of numbers of, when you mention lobbies, number of occasions when you go into a lobby and there's really high impact screens. You know what I mean? Beautifully designed, high impact welcome screens that if they weren't there, you just wouldn't be the same experience. You wouldn't have the same appreciation of that company or environment.
Well, speaking of lobbies, often people will put, if they don't know what else to do, they'll just put the news on mute. And I can't think of anything worse. I mean, if you're trying to, that's like, most of the news is negative and divisive and things like that. Why would you want guests into your building to be surrounded by that information when it's your environment? You can control the message. You can set the mood, set the tone for what happens next. But we just instinctively put the news on because it's something to see and it's sort of maybe business related or something. That's actually terrible psychology. we're putting people, we're not making them think about the company, think about, you know, what they do, not celebrating the work or whatever it might be. We're actually, we're challenging people's minds, and we don't even think about this twice. That's why I wanted to talk about science today, is because that, even that little simple thing where no one really questions it, when you do question it, you're like, actually, I think a blank screen would be better than, you know, than all the troubles of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to go back to your first point around actually thinking through and about what we do with screens, I don't think anyone would disagree that screens grab attention. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's obvious. But the question would be this: knowing that, what are the top 5 things that you would want to draw attention to?
Well, actually, we've got a really nice comment here from Mary Hughes. Thank you, Mary. And please do leave comments in the chat. We're definitely watching. Mary says, we work in manufacturing and in the lobby share inside the facility photos, which often you can't get to because you have to have all the hard hats and things. So as a guest, you know, it's not easy to go on the floor. And she says, we get a lot of feedback on people enjoying the sneak peek behind the scenes. I think that's in the modern world, actually, yeah, with social media, we are opening up more about how we work and celebrating the insides of a business, rather than just the sort of the corporate veneer. And I think that's wonderful. And it's sort of, you know, it just shows, you know, how the pie is made. I'm not sure if that's the right acronym, but I love it. And it makes people feel celebrated and seen. So yeah, definitely grabbing attention. Probably the most obvious point we'll be making today. There's but it's some good ones to come.
I would say keep putting in any comments if there's anything that you share that you draw attention to.
I didn't realize you can also give emojis. Look, she's getting the love. 5 hearts and a thumbs up. There we go. Nice one, Mary. Thank you.
Excellent. Cool. Well, we'll move on to the second topic that came out of the neuroscience white paper, and that it actually boiled down to the fact that passive communication improved cognition or understanding of even quite complex topics. And passive, we talk a lot about mental space, passive communication. And what do we mean by that? We mean our subconscious being aware of what's on digital signage without us necessarily stopping to have a look at it. It's that passive communication that we're not even really thinking about. Our subconscious accounts for a very large percentage of our cognition, of how we work things out.
Yeah, well, if you think about how we communicate, we're somewhat obsessed with immediate distraction, notifications. You know, the attention war is going on. But actually, if we started the show talking about school days. Well, do you remember cramming for an exam? I did. I had to cram for exams. I'm a bit last minute. I think that's probably why I ended up becoming an entrepreneur. Just a bit chaotic. So the night before, I'd cram it all in, get the information in there, go and do the exam. And a week later, I could barely remember what the subject was. But actually, there are songs that I would like sing with my mum or whatever that I can still remember today, you know, from 40 years later, because of the repetition. They've gone into that deeper part of memory. I think they call it memory encoding, don't they? The thing about memory encoding is it's harder. It takes more time. It does require repetition in order for it to succeed. And if you were to send the same person the same email, it would come across, well, either like weird or maybe even slightly aggressive, or, hey, why are you kind of, you know, spamming my inbox with this? You know, there's SDRs who are always like, hey, pop up the inbox. It's annoying, right? But what they're doing is they're trying to repeat and grab your attention. But actually repeating a message on a screen in the environment in which you're in, you know, it's not asking you to go up and look at it all the time. So the fact that it's repeating makes more sense. You're okay with it repeating because you're like, well, you know, it's for maybe someone else who hasn't seen it the first time, or whatever. Now, of course, you can fatigue content, but actually that repetition, especially if it's the corner of your eye that's picking it up. Have you ever noticed? I'm not very good at numbers. Like I have a bit of a number dyslexia, but I'm not terrible. But what I have noticed is when I get, because I struggle a bit with numbers, when I get familiar with them, I very quickly notice when they change. So if I have a dashboard like this, and I know that those numbers are normally, in this case, what, 69 and 57, if that's suddenly changed, my eye would sort of go, oh, that number's a lot different than normal. Like as someone who, but if you show me a load of numbers and say, do something, I'm like, no, I panic about that. But if I get comfortable with it, and that's where that cognition and repetition comes from, then actually I'm quite observant, and I think a lot of other people are like that as well. But yeah, this is the medium in which repetition is expected and is not like annoying for the audience, but it also means you can start to encode those memories.
Yeah, I think I like to think of it as it's the most graceful repetition, because it is ambient, and you never really feel it's being pushed. So it's more graceful than
So
rotation.
Oh, sorry, I think I said a comment from Michael about for Impact Networking, we put the customer logo with a welcome on our Jumbotron. Well, I mean, that's a huge screen. And I've actually seen visitors taking selfies with it. So yeah, I think that makes a huge amount of sense as well. Yeah, we love it. And I love these emojis that are doing. So yeah, if we miss your comment for a bit, we'll always come back to it. But I'm glad to see the recognition going on as well. It's cool.
Yeah, thanks, folks. The final thought I just would raise around the passive nature of this communication is something I think we all experience as well. We all know what it's like to not really be listening to someone because we're sitting, waiting, figuring out what we're going to say next. And actually, that's actually the power of passive communication, is that the screen is not requiring you to act. You'll see it maybe 7 times a day. You'll maybe over the course of a week see that message maybe 8, 9, 10, 12 times. And it's not requiring you to act. So actually your brain relaxes into listen mode, not respond mode. And actually that's where the cognition is improved. And I would say, just back to the same question, it's easy to talk about these topics theoretically, and actually they're a lot of fun to talk about. But if we actually asked ourselves, what are the things we need people to understand? What are the things in our business, in your team, that actually would impact your business if people had a better understanding of them? I'm not saying you put it on a screen and suddenly it's sorted, but actually that is one step in building that knowledge in your business, is to think about what it is you want people to understand.
I think that's a really good point, because the reality is, because it takes more time to encode memory and to encode into the brain, to actually tap into this more powerful form of memory, you can't do it with too many messages. So you have to be quite selective. And also the way that message comes across, it has to be something that is relatively snackable and understandable. And yeah, so I think actually having that editorial slant of like, what's the most important thing we want people to take away, and then editorializing around that. And it also can be explained in different ways, because people learn and will appreciate in different manners. Some people are very analytical, so maybe the numbers will impact them. Some people are more visual, maybe it will be pictures or storytelling. The beautiful thing about a screen medium is you can play with the medium to explain the same point in different ways and tap into different ways of where people respond. So, like I am using some personal anecdotes today, but I think it's always important to be cognizant that just because that's what works for me doesn't mean it works for everyone else. And this is where print kind of lets us down, because if you had to print a poster, you had to choose a way of communicating. But with the screen, you've got that extra time, that you've got the power of the medium to be flexible with it and to be more adaptive.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Well, we'll move on to the third topic relating to the neuroscience of visual media, and that's retention. And we've touched on this a little bit, but again, screens they're, for a variety of reasons, screen improve our retention of information. And this is really interesting one, because it's really easy to test. So there's been lots of tests done where you can just find out how many people remember this piece of information based on whether they've seen it on screen. But there are a few key reasons why our retention is improved. One is that actually we do associate memories with locations. So like we've all said that, where did I see that? We've said that phrase, where did I see that? Or my classic is, I'm very aware, I walk the dog most days and I would listen to podcasts, but I associate certain parts of the walk with where I've heard something interesting, because the memory is associated with that corner where I was. And it's the same. Screens are one of the very few visual media that are physical. that are located in a specific location. And that in itself is a real aid to triggering retention of the content that's on it.
It's also very helpful for it's the time and the place. So, like in almost any other digital media, you can't guarantee where the human will be when they actually receive that notification or that message. But by showing it on a screen, you know where they physically are, the time of day, and you can basically make it more associated and more like impactful, because if it's related to that location, then actually the importance of it becomes more obvious to the person seeing it. But yeah, very much that like utilizing location-based messaging is like super important here. I think that makes a massive difference.
And it returns as well to the repetition, and that's probably the biggest factor in retention is repetition. We have very poor recollection for things we've only ever come across once.
Exactly.
I like here's a little game I like to play on webinars, and it's very simple. We've been on here about 20 minutes now, and I would be very confident that most of the people listening to this webinar at some point have lifted their phone and scrolled something while listening. You've scrolled through something, whether it be an Instagram feed or a LinkedIn feed, or you do it during a meeting, you do it in whatever, we scroll feeds. The game is this: what can you recall of what you have scrolled through this last 5-10 minutes? Most of us scroll perpetually, and we can't recall anything.
Emmanuel did
one focused mind. But I often the scale of a screen coming up and giving you that one message is actually like, it's almost an anti-pattern to scrolling. It's giving you the message, and it's giving you the message, as Mark said, at that right time and place, rather than it being just something of a massive amount of content.
And I think also actually this ties into a question Jenny's asked, which is, can you mix social with business content? So that's actually quite an interesting thing. It's almost like there could be, in this example, we've got the cybersecurity training, which people might kind of not immediately be drawn to. But alongside it, we're showing something which is a bit more social, like it's an employee recognition thing that might actually be more attractive to the eye, because you're like, oh, yeah, I know Rebecca. So that's kind of cool and interesting. Or it could be the weather. We're all a bit obsessed with the weather in this country. So, so that's where the social content can actually draw you in and then associate alongside the business content, which they may not feel that they're as interested in, health and safety and things like that. So I think actually that mix works with that point you were just making.
And I think mix in general, it's not just social work. It's we often think in terms of functional communications, and functional communication for me is just asking the question, what makes, at this point in time, at this location, what makes people's life easier?
Yeah.
Just what's the information that at that point in time is not about driving engagement or informing them on strategy or cognition? What just makes their life easier? Because if there's something on that screen that makes their life easier every day at that point in time, they'll look at that screen every day.
Yeah.
I was going to add for food or whatever. Go ahead, Mark.
Sorry, I was going to add on the location side of things. This is why we also tell customers, and customers want to do this as well, to not just have centralized content on these screens, but to actually give the power to someone locally to also contribute content to the screen, so that the screen does in fact reflect that location more, and it will feel more, a screen as part of the environment rather than just as a kind of corporate propaganda channel, which can, sometimes that's what one of the customers once called it, when it was all centralized content. So actually, mixing social and business content makes sense, but also having people on the ground also be able to add their content. That screen is just going to feel more personalized, and there's no way a centralized communication team will be able to achieve that. They probably haven't even been to some of these locations. So yeah, I think kind of mixing that up really will also help retain more information as well.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I'll wrap up this section really has been around in neuroscience, how our brain perceives and the benefits gained. So reminder, attention, cognition, and retention. So again, as communicators, the key thing to ask is those questions are, what are we driving? What information are we driving attention to? What do we need our teams to understand better? And what is it that we need to retain to bring front of mind and help people with retention? So it's worth asking those three questions and doing a little bit of a map and a mind map on what are knowing that screens benefit us in this way. How can we leverage that? How can we make the most out of that?
And I love what Kimberly has just posted here, what she's saying, that they've been posting safety trivia questions specific to their industry, and employees love it. So they're potentially, it's a dry topic, making it interesting and engaging. And actually, I saw a picture from another customer visit yesterday where they were doing on-screen polls, just asking people, even just like it doesn't always have to be kind of too serious. It's just, asking people about what they're wearing for Halloween and things like that and stuff like that. It shows that this is a medium that is fluid, and you can be experimental with how you do this. And you don't have to think of it like a poster anymore. It can be interactive. It can be more engaging. So I really like what Kimberly was saying there.
Yeah, I can give a few examples that I think really show that just a little bit of thought. Some of my favorite screen content. I had one utilities company that obviously the weather is very important, but instead of showing the weather every day, what they did is they superimposed their main weather guy in the company in front of an image. They just literally had, I think his name was George or Graham. So every day it was Graham in front of snow or Graham in some bizarre photograph. And honestly, it just got people talking about where's Graham today. And it literally was just a weather forecast. Another one was for a large shipping company. So people are really distributed firms, organizations, people just sending in sunrises and sunsets in different locations around the world. And it's striking content. It drives people. It doesn't achieve a communication benefit, but it achieves this cultural benefit that your workplace is something that everyone shares and everywhere someone wants to be. And I'll give you my favorite one though. My very favorite piece of screen content was just the celebration when the Belfast hub defeated the London hub of football.
Yes.
In ScreenCloud. So these are all impressive.
Because we don't have restricted permissions, they took over one of the screens in the London office and put up this. Yeah, that caused a lot of stir. But there's some really good other comments here. Hannah, I work for a university welcome centre, and we use screens to show stories, videos of what's happening at the school. We also get to know your tour guide slides, which is really cool. So personalising the people. I think also, I imagine the kids love having their stories celebrated on screen. They probably feel like quite a sense of achievement and that they're being seen. And Michael's been using OneDrive. So you don't actually, again, there's different ways you can do it, where you can just throw images into a folder and just get people to participate that way. So they don't even have to have a ScreenCloud login. We share a load of pet pictures, don't we? We're all quite big pet lovers here. So everyone's showing their dogs and cats and various things all lobbed together. Wonderful.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so slight change of topic as we look at behavioral science. And the team, it was professor and doctor, PhD student actually at Durham University in the Department of Psychology had done a white paper, a research paper around the impact of digital signage. And what was interesting from their perspective, so rather than a neuroscience physiological perspective, they were coming at it from a behavioral perspective, and they focused much more on the content on the screen rather than the media of the screen. So they weren't really focusing on it being passive or drawing attention. They were focusing on how the content impacted behavior, and that was quite interesting. So we're going to step through just some of the topics that came out of that white paper. And this is a fun one to start with. It's actually a topic I find really fascinating, and it's processing fluency. And what processing fluency means is simply that we like stuff more that we can understand easily. It's
I
that.
laughed when I saw this slide because I immediately went, oh, and then I got to the last bit and going, we tend to prefer things that are simple to understand. I was like, oh yes, that's good. I'm not sure this slide does that, but it's quite funny, isn't it? But it makes sense. It makes sense.
It's a case in point. We like stuff that we understand easily. And actually, just before we dip into a little bit more into processing fluency, one of the interesting things that came out of it was they identified that actually easy to understand replaced repetition in many cases. That if something was easy to understand, we liked it the first time we heard it, rather than the need for repetition. So processing fluency does have a big impact in how we understand and retain information as well.
I think it's probably, I mean, the way I kind of sometimes think about my own memory, as this is clearly not scientific, but I kind of think of my own memory as like a filing system. And when I can remember something well, it's like a well-placed file, you know, put in the right kind of order and alphabetized. I'm a bit like that. I've got all my t-shirts are in different color codes in my wardrobe, so you can see the kind of human I am. And I think that I probably can't recall things I don't fully get because I don't know quite how to file them. They're still in a kind of a cognitive processing place, and you can't, if you're working on something, you can't exactly file it away. That's how I mentally feel. If I'm not really sure of something, it's kind of stuck there and almost with a bit of stress around it. But when I kind of like feel like, all right, I've got that, cool, boom, I can move on, and then I can recall it. So I think that's how I interpret it anyway.
Absolutely. These you see the 1 to 5 there. So these are just 5 suggestions that actually were directly in the white paper as to how to improve processing fluency. In other words, how to make people like your content better and have a bigger impact on their behavior.
This is interesting, isn't it? Because you could argue, looking at this, that the slide on the right with the extra text is in fact celebrating Rebecca better, right? Because it's trying to, like, although the words itself actually don't really say that much, it's attempting to explain why she's Employee of the Month. Whereas on the left, it's just sort of acknowledging that. Yet we know for a fact that the left one will be more impactful. And why is that? It's because the screen itself doesn't have to be the answer, right? What we're really trying to do with this screen is, well, one, when Rebecca sees that, I'm sure she'll feel that recognition that I was talking about earlier, that I felt when I walked into the lobby of my customer. But actually what we're trying to do is prompt people in real life to go and have an experience with her. So if they see her, you know, in the cafeteria, to sort of maybe acknowledge, hey, well done, or maybe even share on why I feel you've done so great, because Rebecca does a lot of things for a lot of people, right? And so, you know, if you celebrate one thing on the screen, you might actually be missing a lot of the other things that she does that you weren't aware of. So it doesn't have to be a one and done answer. It's about trying to trigger moments and trigger things to happen in real life. And therefore we don't need to share everything.
And in fact, in this case, people are much less likely to remember or engage with the content on the right, because they actually understand it less, because it involves a lot of effort in reading that text. So it means they actually engage with it less, even though there is more content. And we have Chuck.
Hello, Chuck.
Hello. Thanks for letting me join late here today, gentlemen.
No worries. Well, it was a good reason. Your wife is becoming a US citizen, correct?
Well, yeah, I don't know if you had mentioned anything about it, but yeah, we about a 7-year process, and she had her interview this morning, and there was a ceremony within an hour immediately after her interview. So they're like, let's just get this all done in one day. So yeah, she is now one of us. She is now officially an American, all within a matter of a few hours that took 7 years to make happen. Wow. So yes.
Awesome. Well, congratulations. Really, really pleased for Kristen. So, well, welcome, Chuck. We're just starting to go through some tips around effective, the science of kind of communication. And we're getting a lot of love in the audience chat. Kristen's awesome. So she's very much a value add to the US.
She was a good import. We made a good trade on that
Very
one.
good.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think so. Well, we'll just jump into the next hint here around improving processing fluency, and that's rhyming. Who doesn't love a good rhyme or alliteration just to make something more memorable? In fact, we should have had one for Chuck's success today. We should have created a rhyme and then you all would have remembered. But in this example, just making a date to donate it improves the processing fluency than a sentence that was saying something like sign up or register to give blood at, the actual alliteration or rhyme and a little bit of fun makes it easier for people to grasp and grapple with.
Yeah, I actually see this as one area where the communicators can learn a lot from their friends in marketing of coming up with what are those great calls to action, what are those great taglines that motivate people. I think that's where our colleagues in marketing can become a great resource, and honestly also a great use of AI to help you come up with some of these little quips or reminders or taglines or jingles, whatever it is, to get employees to pay attention.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You don't need to be, a big advertising agency creative to come up with these campaigns now. If you know broadly what you want to do, and also I find that actually there's a lot of very creative people internally. Like there's some hilarious people, I don't include myself, at ScreenCloud, who would definitely be my go-to people for inspiration on taglines and things like that. But it makes a lot of sense. And I think also something like a date to donate, it feels more of a campaign and less of like, oh, just here's a message, look at this message. It feels like actually they put some care and craft into this. And it's a kind of another social signal, which is, well, someone's made this thing a thing. Therefore, that's giving me a social signal that maybe I should engage with this more too. Whereas if it just feels like a message prompt on a screen and not really, thought about too much, then it feels like something that I can just let pass by. And I think there is power in that, and that's obviously the marketers understand this, but yeah, this is definitely, that was a really good point, Chuck.
Yeah, I think this is also a chance to, obviously there's a lot of great stock photography out there of people getting their blood drawn. However, also a good reminder, communicators, these are awesome photo opportunities to build your own stock photo library so that when you are doing these campaigns, you can actually feature your own employees and not stock photos.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mark, you mentioned the word campaign, and actually you can very easily make a campaign out of this. So what we're looking at is one quite high impact slide that's actually saying, do this, save 3 lives in an hour. But actually there can equally be a thank you to all who have made a date to donate this week as a secondary message or a reminder. There's a campaign that goes back to that repetition piece we talked about earlier. It doesn't have to be repeating the same thing over and over again. It can be a very simple campaign that people engage with very easily.
And that's where you could have like a countdown to a specific day, you could build more of an awareness, and then kind of we're all going to do it together. And then again, that campaign can come offline, right? It can be, we're actually going to set up, in this case, maybe there's like someone's going to come in or something like that. You could also actually show the number of people who've already signed up. So again, if you start to see, well, actually 40 people have signed up, then actually that's going to draw you in. So there's so many elements just in this one simple thing of all of the various content and context that we could build around it. And maybe actually for people who are less familiar with, this is obviously blood donation, but actually like there's probably a few simple facts that most of us don't even understand. Right, especially maybe about rarer blood groups. I'm completely riffing on this. Right? I'm no expert myself, but it's also using the screen to educate those that maybe wouldn't engage because maybe they feel like unsure about what this all is, or what are the top 3 reasons that people say no? Maybe they like, I sometimes feel a bit faint. I'm coming across really strange, aren't I, today? Like, stressful memory filing. No, he feels faint when he sees his own blood, but like actually, there's probably loads of things around doing that which would maybe make me feel more comfortable. And again, with this medium of screens, you can keep telling these stories and you can keep tapping into the objections or the misunderstandings. You don't have to do a one and done. And we see this too often with customers that it's a really packed slide with a ton of content, trying to take care of everything. It's like, you've got more time. You've got all the time in the world. I mean, these screens are on pretty much all day, every day. So break it down and keep it simpler, and realize that not every message needs to land with every person, but collectively it can really achieve something.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, the third of the tips for improving processing fluency is actually just think about your images. Communicate with your images. It's not just about text. And here, see a very simple example. Always wear your hard hat. 4 hard hats, 4 people.
Actually, there's one tip I would give on this, which we haven't actually done in the example, is it's a little psychological trick I learned when I was doing web design. So with web design, you always have like a call to action, like the main button, right? You go to the homepage, you see that there's the main button, like free trial or whatever it is. If your hero image, if the people in the hero image or the person in the hero image is looking in the direction of your call to action or your key thing, your eye is naturally drawn that way. So if I do that, most people would kind of, oh, there's something over there. And we have a social signal, which is like, oh, look, he's looked at something, so maybe I should look at that too. And so if you do actually format your slide with the person looking at the key thing you want them to take away from that, you will create more, I suppose, more value around that message.
So, Mark, does that mean that the 3 of us should all be sitting like this, looking at our slides?
Yeah. Yeah.
We should be all pointing towards them.
Awesome.
Yeah, excellent. And then number 4 is around numbers. Now, Mark has already mentioned he doesn't like a lot of numbers all at once, but this is a great example. Thinking back to that topic of processing fluency, people like things they understand easily and will then remember and understand. So it's an example of many people see the screen on the left and they know they're not going to understand this easily. Whereas broken down into manageable chunks, much improved processing fluency.
This is one of my big things that, I mean, the elephant in the room about this is that one of ScreenCloud's most popular features is the ability for us to show dashboards securely on a screen. The problem is that almost every dashboard is designed by a business intelligence analyst, right? It's a business analyst designing for other business analysts to use the dashboard to then create reports and do things like that. Very rarely is someone actually designing this dashboard thinking it's going to be on a large screen, which may be up in the sky or 10 feet away, or maybe is for an audience that doesn't understand every single metric on here. So in many ways, customers are putting this stuff up there, and it's good because it's best that numbers can be seen and that the data is shared. And often in some of these environments, like, they have to go to an office and print out a version of the dashboard in order to go and have a meeting. So there's a load of inefficiency around that. But what I really would love to push customers and also try and help customers more is to take this data and then simplify it another layer down for the screen. So that actually, because there's a propensity, I think, with this to think, oh, I've got the dashboard up on the screen, now everyone knows the numbers. Well, for someone like me, that's not helpful. Like, I'm immediately like, what are these numbers? What do you want me to do with it? Like, unless I get some training on this, like, it doesn't mean anything to me. But actually, there is stuff on here which no doubt does mean something to me. But let's just go that extra mile and try and pull that out and make that more visually clear to people. And I think really, we talk about this like data-driven decision making as a kind of common thing we talk about. But like, in order to make people really feel that they can be data-driven, you've got to empower them. And I think the reality is that a business analyst is probably the last person on earth who should be helping people make data-driven decision makers. They literally live in a world of data, but what about people who don't? If we want everyone to be data-driven, then we have to kind of meet them where they are. And so this is a big topic for me, because I kind of feel like we're enabling things, but we're not really helping enough. And just with a little bit more work that we could actually make environments more genuinely data-driven and be a bit more democratic in who actually is seeing data and who's actually making database decisions.
Yeah, I see that the visualization of data is often a challenge for organizations. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Mark, with they're trying to do too much in one space. And it is around the simplification of that data makes the visualization then much easier. And also getting creating, seeing what different, I mean, this one chart here on the right, for example, there's probably 5 or 6 or 20 different ways to showcase that data. So experiment and try around with different ways to visualize data for people, because that will then make it more real for them. And that's ultimately the point of the data.
A really good anecdote about that was one of our board members used to work at Microsoft, and he was the VP of engineering for Excel. And he said that one of the enemies they had of Excel was that everyone defaulted all of their charts to just be pie charts, because that was the first thing that Excel would do. And even if it just was a really poor visual representation of the data, it would always end up in a pie chart. And they developed a more intelligent graphing system that would take data and then say, actually, this is probably better expressed this way or that way. And I think, again, that's a super important point you're making there, that even by simplifying it, it's also and displaying it in which way matters hugely.
I guess it's the same for each of these, that actually it boils down to viewing it from the viewer's perspective and what's needed and what's helpful. I think one of the best examples I've seen around dashboards was actually, I'm trying to remember which company or which customer it was, but it was the engineers were creating the dashboards. And engineers are interesting characters because they work in two worlds. They work in a world of an office where they're sitting at a desk but they also work in a production environment where machines are making things and there's not laptops and desks. Exactly. And the engineers had designed their dashboards for themselves, knowing what they needed when they were down at the production line, because the dashboards were on the site, on the screens at the production line. So they were really good because they only showed them what they needed and not everything else. I always liked that because they were playing both sides of the coin. They were being the creator and the consumer, and the end result was brilliant because they were designing for the end environment.
Well, I think that is a really good point. And often when we're doing site visits, we see people often in an offline sense trying to actually communicate visually on a wall, being quite creative with various bits of paper and things like that. And actually, we can take a lot of inspiration for what people are actually trying to do in the real world, and then go back and apply that digitally to screen and then benefit more widely as well. But you're right. I think because they innately understand what's important, it's easier for them to cut through to what they should actually show, rather than sort of, maybe if you're not so familiar with the location, you might put the thing up on the left here because you're like, well, some of that data will be useful, so I'll put it all up there. And it's like grabbing a load of pebbles and going fling, some of them are going to hit, whereas this is much more targeted, which has obviously been more effective.
This next one's really tightly connected to it. Not about the numbers, but about the use of colors or recognized systems. So very typically a traffic light system to communicate the message without the numbers, or to reinforce and emphasize the numbers. This example is recently across numbers of the states in the US, it's become law to present air quality figures, and I think heat index figures as well. So we're seeing more and more of this kind of traffic light type communication.
Yeah, I love this. I think, again, as someone who's basically not very strong on this, this is a good visual indicator. It could be a heat map. It could be traffic lights. You're basically giving me a visual sense of, what should I be caring about? What should I be thinking about? I even think with some of this stuff, it could be that the data itself isn't even visualized at all. It could be that the data actually then, triggers the image. I think we were talking about that with that weather forecast, right? You don't need to see the number. The image will tell you the story you need to see. And actually, we're just really using data more as like business logic behind the scenes, but actually telling the story is a data-driven prompt rather than just data on a screen. So we can be super imaginative with that. And again, I think it's just it's realizing that everyone is different in how they interpret this information. And then probably the penny drop moment for most customers is, because the screen is so versatile in what you can do, you have the choice to keep showing everything in these different ways and experimenting. And then actually, like, one of the comments we had earlier, taking the feedback from people on the floor and seeing how they prefer to consume this, and even including them as well in that content creation, is, you're going to find that these just become more essential if you keep iterating and just thinking about these simple concepts.
Yeah, I just had my own example of this, which I think about sometimes with data. Employees don't really know what you're trying to tell them. And so I don't know if anybody has AirPod Pros and has used them to do the hearing test yet, using the new iOS. But I got the results, and the data they gave me absolutely meant nothing to me. I didn't know how to interpret the data until they basically just said little to no hearing loss. Great. That's all I needed to know. Right. the decibel amount, all that kind of stuff that they were sharing with me was like, I don't understand. I actually put it in the chat GPT to try to understand it a little bit more. But really all I needed was like thumbs up or not. And I think sometimes the data actually gets in that instant reaction of what employees need to know. And that's where I think colors, emojis, whatever that is, comes into play, because the number 28 may not mean anything to someone, but if it's good, then that's fine. That's all they need to know. The air quality is good. Temperature's normal. That's what they need to know. It's not the data that is the important part.
It's interesting. I think, if I reflect on a lot of what we're talking about here, all of this makes sense. But yet when we're looking across, customers' profiles on what they're doing, very few are doing it. And I think a lot of that is on us, right? As this is why we do webinars like this, and this is why we have success teams. But we're also going to push this back into the product to prompt customers in the right direction, because there is clearly some kind of disconnect still between the medium and what we're showing on that medium. And yet, when you think about all of these things, and even just preparing for this today was a good reminder. And I looked at some of the content we've done, and thought, we're actually breaking our own rules here, and so it's simple, but it's difficult. What do you guys think about how if you were someone who's watched this or watching a recording of this, what would be your takeaway for, like, what would you do next if you're a communicator just getting started with screens, having watched this?
Well, I would start back where we started with the questions around attention, cognition, or understanding and retention, and just ask myself the actual questions. On one side, what is it I need people to understand and be aware of? That's the first half. And then the second half is, what are the actual behaviors that we need to improve in our company? And they're not all going to be driven by screens, but what are the top 5 key behavior shifts or performance shifts we need to change? And then look at what is the content in each of those kind of 2 pillars. And then one of the things that's just come out each time is, and then stop and think about what you're actually going to communicate. And the thing is, there are so many great communicators out there who do exactly that and put a lot of thought into it.
Chuck, what would you say?
I think it's what we've got in the chat here around the simplification we talked about, and getting down, distilling the message as communicators. We tend to want to tell everybody everything all the time, and they don't want to hear everything everywhere all the time. And so it's getting it down to the so what. What air quality, heat index. So what? What does that mean to us? What does that do for us? What am I supposed to do with this information? I think as communicators, we need to ask ourselves those questions all the time. Of course, there's always going to be things that we have to communicate in a variety of ways. But what is the employee supposed to do with that data? There have been a lot of times I've been in talks with communicators where they're like, one of our corporate goals is we need to reduce some random KPI by 5%. And I'll be like, I'm not part of the business. What does that KPI even mean? And they're like, I have no idea. Even the comms team doesn't really understand this, because it's not their job to understand every aspect of the business. But if we as communicators don't understand it, we have to think there's a good portion of our population that probably doesn't understand what are they supposed to do with this information now. So I think sometimes it's pairing the data with either the what's next or what's in it for them or what can they do with it. I think that's that pairing of the comms with the data to complete that story. But I think, again, focusing down to just crisp and clean and clear content. If you just do that, you're winning the game.
And I think if you're not like really experienced in this, like this is where, I mean, I've been using AI now every day to help me with things like this, throwing even, transcriptions of a meeting or whatever it might be, and then asking AI to distill this down. And, you can actually say to the AI, right, like, imagine that you are a communicator and you're talking to this audience, like, how would you distill this down? Or give me 5 options. And I think even if you don't have to then take those options, but those options might trigger something in your own mind, which is like, oh, that's nice. And then you add your own editing to it. And that's where you craft it to be just right. I'm finding that's helping me hugely, especially on topics I'm less familiar with, which again, as communicators, like you said, Chuck, it's a good point. You're being asked to communicate messages, but a whole wide range. You're not going to really fully understand every single topic, but actually AI gives you a bit of a superpower to help you, give a bit of a kind of primer on that.
Yeah, I think that one of my recommendations, and this is a great use of AI, is around creating well-rounded employee personas in your organization. Once I use ChatGPT, once AI learns those personas, you can actually test content against those personas to be like, what is that individual going to learn? What's missing for them? What are their takeaways from it? You can also run visuals by AI and even ask it to recommend visuals to help further explain a story. So I think, to your point, Mark, using it every day, I am the same. And still every day I'm uncovering new creative uses of ways to make me a better communicator, better marketer, better visualizer, better speaker, better every way, shape, and form. We don't know until we ask it. And so I love to see communicators start to experiment more and use AI as that thought partner to create more impactful, more well-rounded communications.
I didn't even know some of those tips. I'm taking some of them away. That's great.
Excellent. There's one other question had come in here earlier that I think just might be worth covering, just because we've had a lot of QR codes up here at different times, and someone's asking, do others see concerns with QR codes in terms of cybersecurity? I'm happy to take that, but I'll tell you my take on that. My take on that is we've been giving people pieces of paper for a long time, and a QR code is the equivalent of the digital piece of paper. You don't hand out highly sensitive stuff in a piece of paper to all your employees, but you do print a newsletter. We did for generations. It's that equivalent. You can give people the useful stuff. The best example, one of the best examples I've seen of using QR codes is working with a bus company, and they were requiring their drivers to go to an office that they never went to, completely out of their normal job routine, to go and get a piece of paper to fill in, when they could just have given them a QR code to scan, fill in the piece of paper in the depot, having their copy just wherever their normal day, and get it dealt with. So I think when it comes to QR codes, they're just a great way to get the feedback you need on your comms. I love the fact Chuck was saying experiment with stuff. QR codes are a really good way to find out what people think of it. Mm-hmm. Did people like it? Did they engage with it? Was it helpful? Rather than a way of communicating secret information.
The biggest mistake I see being made with QR codes is people not testing them, especially if you're uploading them in, or someone puts in a dummy QR code which is a placeholder, but no one actually goes back and verifies that it's actually pointing to where you want it to go. Now, through some various integrations, those can be created automatically. However, if you are uploading a QR code, just test it and then test it again by someone else, because looking at it, no one knows where it goes. And there's all kinds of horror stories out there of rampant QR codes pointing people to the wrong places you want to send employees.
Well, if I was to do a plug for the ScreenCloud platform, we have a QR code automated generator. So actually we can take away some of this problems for people and just mean that it will always work and it will always go to the right place, because it's been thoroughly tested by our QA team. And that probably gives a little bit more reassurance around the security of it as well.
And I've put 2 up there just for you all to test now and to see if they work.
Yeah, Tamara brings up a good point in the chat that depending on how those QR codes are created, again, Mark, whether it's through the ScreenCloud platform or something else, they're not permanent all the time. So that's, again, some of the value of having those integrations where QR codes are automatically built instead of you creating them outside of a platform and uploading them in. They're not all created equal.
Yes, no, I mean, it's good to see them have that resurgence after the COVID brought it all back. It's definitely the best way, I think, to build a relationship between a screen and interactivity. But you do need to be kind of cognizant of the of some of the pitfalls. But again, lean on the automation, put a bit of workflows, and just take that little extra moment to double check and test. That never assume. Sometimes with digital, I think because things are a bit more automated, we just assume it's fine, and we don't do the first obvious thing, which is just like, have you checked the QR code? Does it actually work? Do ours actually work? I haven't checked it. I say that now. I'm like, hopefully it has been.
Well, I think too, it's a matter of testing it. It might be pointing to the right place, but is where it's being pointed mobile friendly? Like, is it actually taking somebody to a place that they can actually view on their phone? We think of now of everything's being mobile friendly, but again, it's just that testing aspect of it to make sure that that's the experience you want to create for your employees.
Boom. Well, I've just seen we're coming up on the hour, which is thank you all so much for watching. Jonny, do you have any final words you'd like to pass on?
Not really, other than have a look at these two documents. They are actually really interesting. If you're like me and you like to read them, I would love you to send me in the stuff we've missed that you can give us, the hints and tips we've missed. But I'd also love to hear about how this changes the way you approach your digital signage. If there's anything you do as a result of what you've heard today, we'd love to hear about it.
Awesome. Well, look, thank you so much. Thanks, Chuck, for joining, and congratulations to Kristen, the latest addition to the US. And thank you, everyone, for your interactions and for watching. We will be sending around a recording of the webinar and also the slides. And my big takeaway would be just go and action one tip tomorrow. Take whatever resonated with you the most today. What's that one thing you're going to change tomorrow? Test it and see how it goes. Ask for some feedback, and you'll start to get into that cycle of improvement. And also give us your feedback as well, because we're determined to make screens more valuable as a communication medium, and we're going to keep evolving the product to help do that, and keep sharing information as we go. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.